okuyabileceğiniz kitapları da düşünmeye çalıştım. Orada içimdeki şey romantik film, romantik kitap aşığı insan Bridgerton'ı seçti. Sadece bu kitap İngilizce. İlk olarak İngilizce okuduğum bir kitabı seçmek istedim. Çünkü ben hani anlamadığım dil olduğunda mesela şahsen çok daha hızlı uykumun geldiğini düşünüyorum. Lütfen dalga geçme. Lütfen. Lütfen. Çünkü eskisi kadar dilim dönmüyor artık İngilizceye galiba. Biraz böyle yavaş yavaş unutma şeyleri gösteriyorum. Aynı zamanda yanıma çayımı da aldım. Arada çay da içerisinden böyle cozy, sıcak, beremi taktım. Güzel. Böyle bir video olsun istiyorum. Eğer sizin de hoşunuza giderse kanalıma abone olup videoyu beğenirseniz beni çok mutlu edersiniz. Hani arkadaşlarınıza da önerebilirsiniz. O zaman da çok mutlu olurum. Bayağı mutlu olurum. Teşekkür ederim çok. O halde başlıyorum. Kitabımız kapağı bence bu konu çok tartışılan bir konu. Kitabın orijinal kapağı mı yoksa film veya dizinin kapağı mı, afişinin kapağı mı olması. Normalde ya ben hep kitabın değil de filmin afişi olan kitaplara elim gidiyor, ne yalan söyleyeyim. Böyle de polemik başlatıyormuşum. Arkadaşlar başlıyorum. Pardon, bölüyorum yine. Normalde gözlük takan bir insanım, özellikle çalışırken ve kitap okurken. Ancak şimdi inatlaştım, takmayacağım. Bir yerde geçersem gözle şaşırmayın. The birth of Simon Arthur Henry Fitzgerald Bassett Earl Cliveden was met with great celebration. Church bells rang for hours. Champagne flowed freely through the gargantuan castle that the newborn would call, and the entire village of Cliveden quit work to partake of the feast and holiday ordered by the young Earl's father. This, the baker said to the blacksmith, is no ordinary baby. For Simon Arthur Henry Fitzgerald Bassett would not spend his life as Earl Cliveden. That was a mere courtesy title. Simon Arthur Henry Fitzgerald Bassett, the baby who possessed more names than any baby would possibly need, was the heir to one of the England's oldest and richest dukedoms, and his father, the 9th Duke of Hastings, had waited years for this moment. As he stood in the hall outside his wife's confinement room, cradling the squealing infant, the Duke's heart near burst with pride. Already several years past 40, he had watched his cronies, dukes and earls, all beget heir after heir. Some had to suffer through a few daughters before siring a precious son, but in the end they would all been assured that their lines would continue, that their blood would pass forward into the next generation of England's elite. But not the Duke Hastings. Though his wife had managed to conceive 5 times in the 15 years of their marriage, only twice had she carried the full term, and both of those infants had been stillborn. After the 5th pregnancy, which had ended with a bloody miscarriage in the 5th month, surgeons and physicians alike had warned their graces that they absolutely must not make another attempt to have a child. The Duchess's very life was in danger. She was too frail, too weak, and perhaps, they said gently, too old. The Duke was simply going to have to reconcile himself to the fact that the dukedom would pass out of the Bassett family. She opened the connecting door between their bedrooms, and the Duke once again commenced their quest for a son. 5 months later, the Duchess informed the Duke that she had conceived. The Duke's immediate elation was tempered by his grim determination that nothing, absolutely nothing, would cause this pregnancy to go over. The Duchess was confined to her bed the minute it was realized that she would miss her monthly courses. A physician was brought in to visit her every day, and halfway through the pregnancy the Duke located the most respected doctor in London and paid him a king's ransom to abandon his practice and take up residence at Clifton Castle temporarily. The Duke was taking no chances this time. He would have a son, and the dukedom would remain in best hands. The Duchess experienced pains a month early, and pillows were tucked under her hips. Gravity might keep the babe inside, Dr. Stubbs explained. The Duke thought that a sound argument, and once the doctor had retired for the evening, placed yet another pillow under his wife, raising her to a 20-degree angle. She remained that way for a month. And then finally, the moment of truth arrived. The household prayed for the Duke, who so wanted an heir, and few remembered to pray for the Duchess, who had grown thin and frail even as her belly had grown round and white. They tried not to be too hopeful. After all, the Duchess had already delivered and buried 2 babies, and even if she managed to safely deliver a child, it would be, well, a girl. As the Duchess' screams grew louder, more frequent, the Duke shoved this away into the chamber, ignoring the protests of the doctor, the midwife, and her grace's maid. It was a bloody mess, but the Duke was determined to be present when the babe's sex was revealed. The head appeared, then the shoulders. All leaned forward to watch as the Duchess strained and pushed, and then the Duke knew that there was a God, and he still smiled as the Bassett's. He allowed the midwife 1 minute to clean the babe, then took the little boy into his arms and marched into the great hall to show him off. "I have a son," he boomed, "a perfect little son." And while the servants cheered and wept with relief, the Duke looked down upon the tiny little Earl and said, "You are perfect. You are a Bassett. You are mine." The Duke wanted to take the boy outside to prove to everyone that he had finally sired a healthy male child, but there was a slight chill in the early April air, so he allowed this midwife to take the babe back to the mother. The Duke mounted one of his prized geldings and rode off to celebrate, shouting his good fortune to all who would listen. Meanwhile, the Duchess, who had been bleeding steadily since the birth, slipped into unconsciousness and then finally slipped away. The Duke mourned his wife. He truly did. He hadn't loved her, of course. She hadn't loved him, but they would have been friends in an oddly distant sort of way. The Duke hadn't expected anything more from marriage than a son and an heir, and in that regard his wife had proven herself as exemplary, suppose. He arranged for fresh flowers to be laid on the base of the funeral monument every week, no matter the season, and her portrait was moved from the sitting room to the hall in a position of great honor over the staircase. And then the Duke got on with the business of raising his son. There wasn't much he could do in the first year. Of course, the babe was too young for lectures on land management and responsibility, so the Duke left Simon in care of his nurse and went to London, where his life continued much as it had before. He had been blessed by parenthood, except that he forced everyone, even the king, to gaze upon the miniature miniature he had painted of his son shortly after his birth. The Duke visited Cliveden from time to time, then returned for good on Simon's second birthday, ready to take the young lad's education in hand. A pony had been purchased, a small gun had been selected for future use for the fox hunt, and tutors were engaged in every subject known to men. "He's too young for all that," Nurse Hopkins explained. "Nonsense," Hastings replied condescendingly. "Clearly, I don't expect him to master any of this anytime soon, but it is never too early to begin a duke's education." "He's not a duke," Nurse muttered. "He will be." Hastings turned his back on her and crouched beside his son, who was building an asymmetrical castle with a set of blocks on the floor. The Duke hadn't been down to Cliveden in several months, and was pleased with Simon's growth. He was a sturdy, young, healthy boy, with glossy brown hair and clear blue eyes. "What are you building there, son?" Simon smiled and pointed. Hastings looked up at Nurse Hopkins. "Doesn't he speak?" She shook her head. "Not yet, Your Grace." The Duke frowned. "He's two. Shouldn't he be speaking?" "Some children take longer than others, Your Grace. He's clearly a bright young boy." "Of course he's bright. He's a Basset." Nurse nodded. She always nodded when the Duke talked about the superiority of the Basset blood. "Maybe," she suggested, he just doesn't have anything he wants to say." The Duke didn't look convinced, but he handed Simon a toy soldier, patted him on the head, and left the house to go exercise the new mare he had purchased from Lord Worth. 2 years later, however, he wasn't a sanguine. "Why isn't he talking?" he boomed. "I don't know," Nurse answered, wringing her hands. "What have you done to him?" "I haven't done anything. If you'd been doing your job correctly, he," the Duke tapped an angry finger in Simon's direction, "would be speaking." Simon, who was practicing his letters on his miniature desk, watched the exchange with interest. "He's 4 years old, goddammit," the Duke roared. "He should be able to speak." "He can write," Nurse said quickly. 5 children I've raised, wasn't it? And not one of them took the letters in the way Master Simon has. A fat lot of good writing is going to do him if he can't talk. Hastings turned to Simon, rage burning in his eyes. "Talk to me, damn you!" Simon shrank back, his lower lip quivering. "Your Grace," Nurse explained, "you're scaring the child." Hastings whipped around to her face. "Maybe he needs scaring. Maybe what he needs is a good dose of discipline. A good paddling might help him find his voice." The Duke grabbed the silver-backed brush Nurse used on Simon's hair and advanced on his son. I'll make you talk, you stupid little..." "No," Nurse gasped. The Duke dropped the brush. It was the first time they would ever heard Simon's voice. Küçük bir çay molası. "What did you say?" the Duke whispered, tears forming in his eyes. Simon's fist balled at his sides and little chin jutted out as he said, "Don't you..." The Duke's face turned deadly pale. "What is he saying?" Simon attempted to sentence again. "Da. My God," the Duke breathed, horrified. "He's a moron." "He's not a moron," Nurse cried, throwing her arms around the boy. those years of praying for an heir, and now it's all for ruin. I should have let the title go to my cousin. He turned back to his son. He was sniffling and wiping his eyes, trying to appear strong for his father. I can't even look at you, he gasped. I can't even bear to look at him. And with that, the Duke stalked out of the room. Nurse Hopkins hugged the boy close. You're not an idiot, she whispered fiercely. You're the smartest little boy I know, and if anyone can learn to talk properly, I know it's you. The Simon turned into a warm embrace and sobbed. We'll show him, Nurse vowed. He'll eat his words if it's the last thing I do. Nurse Hopkins proved true to her words. While the Duke of Hastings removed himself to London and tried to pretend he had no son, she spent every walking minute with Simon, sounding out words and syllables, praising him lavishly when he got something right and giving him encouraging words when he didn't. The progress was slow, but Simon's speech did improve. By the time he was 6, don't had turned into don't, and by the time he was 8, he was managing entire sentences without faltering. He still ran into trouble when he was upset, and Nurse had to remind him often that he needed to remain calm and collected if he wanted to get the word out of in one piece. But Simon was determined, and Simon was smart, and perhaps most importantly, he was damn stubborn. He learned to take breaths before each sentence and to think about his words before he attempted to say them. He studied the feel of his mouth, and he spoke correctly and tried to analyze what went wrong when he didn't. And finally, at the age of 11, he turned to Nurse Hopkins, paused to collect his thoughts, and said, I think it is time we went to see my father. Nurse looked up sharply. The Duke had not laid eyes on the boy even in 7 years, and he had not answered a single one of the letters Simon sent him. Simon had sent nearly 100. Are you certain? She asked. Simon nodded. Very well, then I'll order the carriage. We'll leave for London on the morrow. The trip took a day and a half, and it was late afternoon by the time their carriage rolled up the Bassett House. Simon gazed at the busy London street cape, but wondered as Nurse Hopkins led him up the steps. Neither had ever visited Bassett House before, and so Nurse didn't know what to do when she reached to the front door other than knock. The door swung open within seconds, and they found themselves being looked down upon by the rather imposing butler. Deliveries, he intoned, reaching to the closed door, are made in the rear. Oh, there, Nurse said quickly, jamming her foot in the door. We're not servants. The butler looked disdainfully at her garments. Well, I am, but he's not. She grabbed Simon's arm and yanked him forward. This is Earl Clifton, and you would do well to treat him with respect. The butler's mouth actually dropped open. He blinked several times before saying, It is my understanding that Earl Clifton is dead. What? Nurse screeched. I most certainly am not, Simon exclaimed with all the righteous indignation of an 11-year-old. The butler examined Simon, recognized immediately that he had the look of Bassett's, and ushered them in. Why did you think I was dead? Simon asked, cursing himself for misspeaking, but not surprised. He was always most likely to stutter when he was angry. It is not for me to say, the butler replied. It most certainly is, Nurse shot back. You can't say something like that to a boy of his years and not explain it. The butler was silent for a moment, then finally said, "His Grace had not mentioned you in here years. The last I heard, he said he had no son." He looked quite plain as he said it, so no one pursued the conversation. We, the servant that is, assumed he would pass on. Simon felt his jaw clenched, felt his throat working wildly. "Wouldn't he have gone into mourning?" Nurse demanded. "Did you think about that? How could you be assuming the boy was dead if his father was not mourning?" The butler shrugged. "His Grace frequently wears black. Mourning wouldn't have altered his costume." "This is an outrage," Nurse Hopkins said. "I demand you summon his Grace at once." Simon said nothing. He was trying too hard to get his emotions under control. He had to. There was no way he would be able to talk with his father while his blood was racing, so the butler nodded. "He's upstairs. I'll alert him immediately to your arrival." Nurse started pacing wildly, muttering under her breath and referring to his Grace with every wild word in her surprisingly extensive vocabulary. Simon remained in the center of the room. "You can do this," he shouted in his mind. "You can do this." Nurse turned to him, saw him trying to control his temper, and immediately gasped. "Yes, that's it," she said quickly, dropping to her knees and taking his hands in hers. She knew better than anyone what would happen if Simon tried to face his father before he calmed down. Take deep breaths and make sure to think about your words before you speak. If you can control. "I see you're still mollycoddling the boy," came an imperious voice from the doorway. Nurse Hopkins straightened and turned slowly around. She tried to think of something respectful to say. She tried to think of something that would smooth over this awful situation. But when she looked at the Duke, she saw Simon in him, and the rage began anew. The Duke might look just like his son, but he was certainly no father to him. "You, sir," she spat out, "are despicable, and you met him, are fired." Nurse lurched back. "No one speaks of the Duke of Hastings that way," he roared. "No one. Not even the king." Simon taunted. Hastings whirled around, not even noticing that his boy had spoken clearly. "You," he said in a low voice. Simon nodded curtly. He had managed one sentence properly, but it had been a short one, and he didn't want to push his luck. Not when he was this upset. Normally he couldn't go days without a stutter. He could go days without a stutter, but now the way his father stared at him made him feel like an infant, an idiot infant. And his tongue suddenly felt awkward and thick. The Duke smiled cruelly. "Do you have to say for yourself?" What do you have to say?" "It's all right, Simon," Nurse Hopkins whispered, throwing a furious glance at the Duke. "Don't let him upset you. You can do it, sweetling." And somehow her encouraging tone made it all the worse. Simon had come here to prove himself to his father, and now his nurse was treating him like a baby. "What's the matter?" the Duke taunted. "Cat got your tongue." Simon's muscles clenched so hard that he started to shake. Father and son stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, until finally the Duke swore and stalked toward the door. "You're my worst failure," he hissed at his son. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, but God help me if I ever lay eyes on you again." "Your Grace," Nurse Hopkins said indignantly. This was no way to speak to a child. "Get him out of my sight," he spat at her. "You can keep your job just so long as you keep him away from me." "Wait!" The Duke turned slowly around Simon's voice. Did you say something? He drawled. Simon took 3 long breaths in through his nose, his mouth still clamped together in anger. He forced his jaw to relax and rubbed his tongue against the door of his mouth, trying to remind himself of how it felt to speak properly. Finally, just as the Duke was about to dismiss him again, he opened his mouth and said, "I'm your son." Simon heard Nurse Hopkins breathe a sigh of relief, and something he had never seen before blossomed in his father's eyes. Pride. Not much of it, but it was something there, lurking in the deeps, something that gave Simon a whisper of hope. "I am your son," he said again, this time a little louder, "and I am not Suddenly his throat closed up and Simon panicked. You can do this, but his throat felt tight, and his tongue felt thick, and his father's eyes started to narrow. "I am not Go home," the Duke said in a low voice. "There's no place for you here." Simon felt the Duke's rejection in his very bones, felt a peculiar sound of pain enter his body and creep around his heart, and as hatred flooded his body and poured from his eyes, he made a solemn vow. If he couldn't be the son his father wanted, then by God, he would be exact opposite. Chapter 1. Prologue okuduk. Bir dakika, bir çay içeyim yine. Bence Chapter 1'ı bir sonraki session'ımıza saklayalım. Ne dersiniz? Umarım hoşunuza gitmiştir. Yani konseptten çok emin olamadım. Yorumlarınızı yazarsanız aşağıya çok sevinirim. Devam edelim mi yoksa durduralım mı İngilizce kitap okuma sessionlarını? Dediğim gibi haftaya Türkçe'yi de koyacağım. O yüzden